In the run-up to the US presidential election, there was the beginning of a row about rumoured Russian interference in the elections, in support of Donald Trump and against Hillary Clinton. The rumours began when WikiLeaks hosted a series of documents, the Podesta emails, leaked from the Gmail account of a former White House Chief of Staff and the chair of Hillary Clinton's campaign, John Podesta. The Department of Homeland Security immediately pointed the finger at the Russians, though it did not say how it had reached its conclusions. According to Politico, cybersecurity experts traced the hack to Russian intelligence. A long expose on Vice's technology website, MOTHERBOARD, explains how the connection to Russia was made. The smoking gun, according to the website, is a link to an organization nicknamed Fancy Bear, reputedly linked to Russian intelligence. Maybe this is true, but the hack occurred by means of someone naively clicking on a link in a phishing email, which is hardly a sophisticated operation requiring the input of intelligence. The leaks were particularly damning for the Clinton camp. One of the emails contained Clinton staffers discussing one of her speeches to Wall Street, where she is supposed to have said, "You need both a public and a private position when it comes to policy," thus seeming to confirm that the would-be president was two-faced in the way that many voters already felt that she was. It also included an email in which Democratic National Committee Chair Donna Brazile said about presidential debates that from time to time I get questions in advance, thus implying that there is a crooked relationship between the political establishment and the media establishment. These revelations may or may not have had an effect on poll results, showing that Clinton was considered less trustworthy than Trump, and they may or may not have had an effect on the final win by Donald Trump. But many pro-Clinton media commentators didn't need to think about it. Josh Marshall, of Talking Points Memo, evidently uninterested in the message of the leaks, focused on the alleged messenger, claiming on the basis of spurious evidence that Trump appears to have a deep financial dependence on Russian money from persons close to Putin. The Gawker, again without evidence, asserted that Russia, via WikiLeaks, releases 20,000 hacked DNC emails just in time for the convention. Clinton's campaign manager was soon repeating the same thing on CNN. The hack was a Russian plot to help Trump. The stories of Russian interference piled up. As soon as Trump won, the mainstream media and liberal opinion formers expostulated with rage at Russian manipulation extending far wider than the Podesta emails. And at that point, US intelligence agencies and legislators joined in. Donald Trump won the election while losing the popular vote, a feat last matched by Bill Clinton in 1992 and 1996. As soon as this happened, a number of liberal commentators began to wail and gnash their teeth. The very popular liberal news anchor, Keith Olbermann, was perhaps the most comical, producing a video outlining the theory that there had been a Russian-sponsored coup.
We are no longer a sovereign nation. We are no longer a democracy. We are no longer a free people. We are the victims of a bloodless coup. So far, a bloodless coup.
He demands that Obama make urgent attempts to unveil the links between the Russian Federation and the Republican National Congress, declaiming passionately,
"There is no time for a full review or a measured analysis or recommendations to prevent interference in our future elections, because permitting Donald Trump to assume the office of president reduces the chance that we will have any future elections."
This is what the writer Sam Kriss called, with lethal accuracy, the alt-center. Mandarin liberals so deranged by their defeat that they've taken to conspiracy theory. Writing about the extraordinary and widely lauded conspiracy theory produced by the business and government analyst Eric Garland, which began with the immortal legend, "It's time for some game theory," Kriss described the process wherein, on December the 11th, fueled by prescription amphetamines and craft beer, Eric Garland disgorged a sprawling 127-tweet thread explaining to America and the world exactly what was going on, how Russia put Trump in power, and what they could do about it. And the thing was a sensation. Clearly something horrifying has happened to America's great liberal intellects. This is, after all, how cults get started. Garland's tweet storm was a barroom rant, riffing on cliché and baffling non sequitur containing no evidence and no original thinking, and yet it went down a storm. US intelligence was soon engaged in an extraordinary campaign to inculpate the Russian Federation and Vladimir Putin in subverting the election, the US Director of National Intelligence calling Russia an existential threat to the United States and saying that there was no doubt Russia interfered in the election. The CIA let it be known that it had undertaken a secret assessment, as reported in the Washington Post, that concluded that Russian intervention had taken place, although, as Marcy Wheeler of Slate magazine pointed out, the language of the report was misleading because it glossed over serious disagreements within the agency about the status of the information. Finally, all 17 US intelligence agencies authored a report outlining the ways in which they thought Russia had intervened. CNN, in an attempt to jazz up the claims, broke it down into the 10 most damning findings from report on Russian election interference. These began with the intelligence assertion that Putin ordered an influence campaign, included the CIA's recapitulation of its existing orthodoxy about Russia's geopolitical posture, and then made the scantiest possible reference to the embarrassing CIA analysis of Russian media's involvement in the election. Russian media hailed President-elect Trump's victory, CNN asserted under the heading of Russian media involvement. This is underwhelming enough, but that was CNN trying to make it more interesting. The actual CIA report includes an amateurish discourse analysis of Russia Today and other sources proving not interference, but just that Russia Today was broadly pro-Trump. Almost all of the press accepted that every word of this was the stone-cold truth because the CIA said so. CNN's reporter, Jeremy Diamond, did his best to gloss this vapid spiel, describing it as the product of the latest and most complete analysis of intelligence on the hacking. He was unable to cite any evidence that had confirmed the case because the CIA didn't present any. But the intelligence agencies hadn't claimed that the interference changed the election outcome, or even made the slightest difference. As Obama applied sanctions to Russia, the establishment press didn't even bother to query the rationale. The New York Times wrote, "Obama strikes back at Russia for election hacking." The entire premise of the article was that Russia had indeed interfered in the election, but more than that, the wording of the headline suggested that the electoral system had in some way been hacked. As investigative journalist and former CBS reporter Sharyl Attkisson felt compelled to point out, the claim that the election was hacked is a bit of a misnomer. There's no standing allegation by US officials that the Russians or anyone else hacked into our election system or altered vote counts. Not all commentators were doe-eyed in their acceptance of the story. Rolling Stone's Matt Taibbi's nostrils went aflare as he declared, "Something about this Russia story stinks." To wit, if the American security agencies had smoking gun evidence that the Russians had an organized campaign to derail the US presidential election and deliver the White House to Trump, then expelling a few dozen diplomats after the election seems like an oddly weak and ill-timed response. Liberal Republican Daniel Drezner warned in the Washington Post that the evidence contained in the report is pretty damn thin. Most of the report is assertions of the intelligence community's confidence in the findings. Glenn Greenwald, writing for The Intercept, was scolding about the Washington Post's role in disseminating false news about Russia. Each now bears a humiliating editor's note, grudgingly acknowledging that the core claims of the story were fiction. Journalists who spread the false claims subsequently note the retraction or corrections only in the most muted way possible, and often not at all. Finally, there emerged a new set of claims published in BuzzFeed, this time carefully hedged as unverified, being based on a report prepared for political opponents of Trump by a person who is understood to be a former British intelligence agent, which includes clear errors, but which, if true, suggests that Trump has long-standing contacts with Russian intelligence and could have been blackmailed by them. Thus far, the only evidence-based allegation in the whole intelligence campaign was that the Russians had something to do with the leak of Podesta's emails. That leak, far from being disinformation, actually showed voters what Clinton is really like. And it is predictable that Clinton's media supporters should wish to avoid the message and focus on who the messenger might be. Janine Jackson writes for Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting about previous triumphant reporting of US interference in Russian elections, pointing out a cover from Time magazine, a chipper Boris Yeltsin holding an American flag, and the line, "Yanks to the rescue, the secret story of how American advisors helped Yeltsin win." Hypocrisy is nothing new, certainly not in this kind of febrile Cold War climate. But the astonishing thing is that the American government is widely proclaiming to the whole world that its power and its internal security and its election processes are so enfeebled that a greatly diminished economic basket case like the Russian Federation could take it down. If we are headed to another Cold War, perhaps we need to revisit Marx's dictum that history does repeat itself, first as tragedy, then as farce.